HIV/AIDS is the biggest medical hoax of all time. It shows us just how much trouble we are in this country. You should be very worried about how this was allowed to happen. Incredible political machinery supported by systematic deceit had to be in place to make this hoax work. If you want to understand medicine, science, our government, our legal system, our media, or what happens when bureaucracy replaces all of the above, you would only need to learn the truth about HIV/AIDS. In 1987, a man named Bryan Ellison dared to tell the truth and lost his career to try and save the lives of millions of people by exposing the HIV/AIDS scam. Chances are you have never heard of him. How can this be? I'll let him explain. Who is Bryan Ellison, and what is the truth about HIV/AIDS?
The AIDS epidemic has now existed for over 15 years, during which time over 400,000 Americans have fallen victim to the syndrome. According to the U.S. federal government, the cause of this terrible plague was identified nearly 12 years ago, a virus named HIV. The government has spent some $40 billion fighting this virus, including funding tens of thousands of scientists to produce nearly 100,000 papers on this single virus, more research than any other virus in human history. Yet, to this day, the government cannot demonstrate that it has saved a single life from AIDS. The largest biomedical program of all time has not produced a vaccine, an effective treatment, or even a proven method of prevention. Indeed, the epidemic continues to grow even as scientists find themselves totally able to predict its course. In short, the government's massive war on AIDS has been a dismal failure. The following lecture will open your eyes to a shocking biomedical controversy inside the scientific establishment, possibly the largest and most important of the 20th century. Specifically, you will learn why many top researchers now believe that the government has blamed the AIDS epidemic on the wrong cause. This would explain why we are losing the war on AIDS. The HIV virus was officially named the cause of AIDS by the federal government in 1984 at a press conference, not a scientific forum. That announcement immediately ended funding for AIDS research in any other direction, forcing scientists to study only this virus as the assumed cause of the epidemic. But was the government right in identifying HIV as the culprit? Not according to hundreds of top scientists and physicians who now believe something else may be the real cause of AIDS. Nor are these dissident researchers easy to dismiss. Among their growing ranks are prestigious scientists at Harvard, Yale, MIT, the University of California, the Pasteur Institute, and dozens of other major institutions. 3 of these dissenters have been recipients of the Nobel Prize in Medicine or Chemistry. Several are members of the National Academy of Sciences, and most are experts in fields directly relating to AIDS research. These outspoken scientists have managed to publish papers on this debate in many of the most respected scientific journals. They have also attracted some attention in the news media, including coverage in the Sunday Times of London and on ABC Television's Nightline. However, most of the public has never heard of this controversy. Each year, billions of taxpayer dollars pay for the careers of thousands of scientists or are funneled to activists, to medical organizations, and even to news media associations. A huge AIDS industry has been built on public fear of the so-called AIDS virus, and this lobby does not want the gravy train to stop. The AIDS establishment has retaliated against the dissenting scientists by cutting off their research funding, by preventing them from publishing papers in scientific journals, or by otherwise destroying their careers. In order to prevent this debate from becoming public knowledge, the government and AIDS establishment have intercepted and blocked most major television and newspaper interviews with dissident researchers. Reporters who wish to cover this controversy have been openly threatened by the government officials, and government officials have even made offers of money and other incentives to induce dissenting scientists to change their minds and return to the establishment. In a handful of cases, this pressure has succeeded in silencing researchers. But for one that caves in, dozens more are joining the growing ranks of skeptics against the AIDS party line. To break through this blockade, scientist and author Bryan J. Ellison wrote the book Why We Will Never Win the War on AIDS. This book is a thorough review of the AIDS controversy, explained clearly for non-scientific readers, which not only explains what really causes AIDS, but also documents disasters of falsely blaming other diseases on viruses, which people engineered for war on AIDS, and how the government has conducted its campaign of censorship. Not surprisingly, Ellison ran into the same wall when trying to publish his book. Although editors at several major publishing houses acknowledged the bestseller potential of the book, most refused to take it. One publisher finally did sign a contract and then changed its mind several months later, deciding that the book was too controversial to publish. One final publisher picked up the book, also signing a contract for its publication, and also dropped the book a few months afterwards. Realizing the book would never appear with any major publisher, Ellison finally began publishing it himself. At that point came the most surprising development of all. Another publisher, Regnery Publishing of Washington, D.C., purchased the dead contract from one of the publishers that had dropped the book and demanded that Ellison immediately stop publishing the book and destroy all remaining copies. Regnery Publishing, moreover, refused to publish the book. When Ellison continued publishing, Regnery sued in federal court on the opposite side of the country. As it turned out, the president of Regnery Publishing was himself a former top official of the U.S. Justice Department, as was his attorney and judge, breaking an amazing number of federal laws while openly siding with Regnery. The judge forced through a verdict against Ellison and, on November 30th, 1995, signed an order banning the book nationwide.
I'm here today to present to you a controversy that is the greatest medical controversy, certainly of the last 10 or 15 years, and probably of the 20th century. It's a controversy that has now brought in hundreds of top scientists, members of the National Academy of Sciences, Nobel Prize winners, top people at Yale and Harvard, the University of California, and all over the world. Some of the very top people in the areas of virology, epidemiology, molecular biology. If this sounds like Greek to you, actually Latin, the point is that those are the very fields involved at the forefront of AIDS research. So these are the top scientists in the world, very prestigious, very respectable people with top grants from top agencies, who now believe that we may have gotten it all wrong in our war on AIDS. We may have blamed AIDS on the wrong cause. That is to say that in 1984, when Dr. Robert Gallo of the National Institutes of Health of the United States federal government declared that AIDS was caused by the virus HIV, that he simply may have been dead wrong, and we've been barking up the wrong tree in trying to fight AIDS, treat it, prevent it, or deal with it in any way, shape, or form. And yet to this day, we've now spent some probably $40 billion just through the U.S. federal government alone. And this money has, of course, created a huge AIDS industry, an AIDS lobby, and a lot of scientists who are committed to this view, and it's very difficult to back out. And this is why this controversy, albeit is very big, has some very important people behind it, nevertheless, you haven't been hearing about it on the front pages of the New York Times or on CBS or NBC or your nightly news or anything like that. Possibly you may have come across some articles on it or seen a couple of little things here and there, but basically it has not reached the public at large.
Who were the first AIDS victims, and if they didn't have HIV/AIDS, what was wrong with them?
They were 4 homosexual men. They were ages 25 to 50. They had been living the fast lane lifestyle. That is to say, they had been racking up hundreds to thousands of sexual contacts per year, often dozens in a single evening. They'd been going into the discos, the bathhouses, the sex clubs, and so forth, and going through all of the lifestyle associated with that particular lifestyle, which is a subset of the homosexual community, involves tremendous amounts of drug abuse. That is to say, if you're going to have 10 or 20 or 45, I've even found out about, sexual contacts in a single evening, well, you need cocaine and amphetamines, methamphetamines, and so forth to get going. Then you're going to have poppers, a special drug used almost exclusively by these homosexuals. It doesn't have any hallucinogenic properties. It doesn't produce a high, but it does facilitate anal intercourse. And also similarly ethyl chloride, which is a derivative of an old anesthetic. And finally, to wind down at the end of the evening, you need downers and, I don't know, maybe heroin or whatever. But there's going to be quite a mix of drugs. And so these fast lane homosexuals were using tremendous numbers of drugs, and the drug craze for them had begun in the early 1970s and was taking off, and by that time was almost 10 years old, 8 to 10 years. And these men showed up, and they were very immune deficient. They had pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. Now, pneumocystis carinii is apparently a fungus. It's a germ present in the lungs of every woman and child on the face of this planet. The moment you're born, it enters your lungs. It's just everywhere. It's ubiquitous. In most of us, it causes nothing at all. But if you have no immune system, your immune system keeps it in check all your life, and you know, you're just not going to have to worry about it. But if you're immune deficient for any reason, for example, severely malnourished, you're an orphan after a war under harsh conditions, taking cancer chemotherapeutic drugs, for example, which directly destroy the immune system in the hopes of battling cancer, destroy the immune system, or for other reasons, if you are severely immune suppressed, the pneumocystis carinii germ can take over the lungs and create a very serious and even a fatal pneumonia. And it has been seen before in all age groups and risk groups and so forth, but it's not terribly common at most times when you have a healthy, typical, peacetime capitalist society. These men, all 4, had pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. They had Kaposi sarcoma, a cancer of the blood vessels that creates reddish and purplish splotches on the skin. They had candidiasis, which is a yeast infection orally in the esophagus and even in the mouth and so forth. So they were in pretty bad shape, and it turned out they had very few T cells, according to Dr. Gottlieb's device. Now, Dr. Gottlieb realized right away that this was a hot new epidemic that might interest some agencies of the federal government. It was a new disease, you see, and they're always looking for new diseases, anything that shows up. There are quite a few diseases every year, but anything that looks spectacular, they go for. It's a good publicity device, something that the federal agencies can ride to the rescue and save us all from. So Dr. Gottlieb contacted a local agent of the Centers for Disease Control in the Los Angeles County Department of Health, and that person had found a 5th such case. Together, the 5 cases were submitted to the Centers for Disease Control. Now, what you had were entirely old diseases. There was nothing new. Immune deficiencies have been seen before. Pneumocystis has been seen before. Kaposi sarcoma has been seen before. Not typically in this age group in men 25 to 50 years old in the United States, but still seen before, and has even been seen in those risk groups, just not commonly. These cases were reported to the Centers for Disease. The head of venereal diseases, head of infectious venereal diseases at the CDC, James Curran, got the report, wrote hot stuff across the top, rushed it into press with the MMWR of the Centers for Disease Control. This is a weekly newsletter. It goes out to the media. It's the basis of many news stories that you'll see on television or in the New York Times, which these reporters simply take whatever the government tells them without even asking whether this might be the right interpretation, might be the right conclusion. This directly plants stories in the news media all the time, and indeed to the beginning of what is now known as the AIDS epidemic. It was defined as an epidemic, defined as a cluster. Immediately, the Centers for Disease Control and shortly thereafter the virus hunters saw the opportunity in exploiting this and saying, here's a new disease that the entire public could catch, and you will all catch a deadly virus. Of course, they were already jumping several steps ahead of the game. How did they know it was a virus? Well, they didn't, but that was the story. So they put together a task force, and the task force focused its efforts because, you see, at this point, the very first scientists over at the NIH to take a look at this cluster, or the first 50 cases that showed up,